Buckminster. Buckminster was a key world in the Commonwealth's plans. Since it was a prefect capital, the planet was a major centre of the Draconis Combine's bureaucracy. Seizing Buckminster with its vital records and important politicians would create tremendous confusion in the prefecture for years to come. Protecting the world were Lord Kurita's elite 2nd Sword of Light Regiment and 22 of the best infantry and tank regiments in the DCMS. The LCAF assigns the 3rd Royal Guards and the 39 regiments of its RCT to take the planet. The 3rd Royals were commanded by Lieutenant General Roman Steiner, veteran of many battles and trusted ally of the Archon. The main target of the LCAF forces was Buckminster City, the capital of the planet and the prefect on the continent of Sanjusendo. General Goshi Tengwan, commander of the 2nd Sword of Light and the person responsible for Buckminster's defence, concentrated near all of his troops on the continent, especially around Buckminster City. His battle plan was for lesser regiments to delay the Commonwealth invaders until the Sword of Light could arrive to crush them. 3 Kuritan dropships carrying fighters attacked the LCAF ships as they approached Buckminster. The unusually high number of fighters protecting the Commonwealth ships, though, turned back the Kuritan defenders. The Commonwealth drop zone surprised the Combine units. Instead of landing on Sanjusendo near the capital city, the 3rd Royal Guards and other regiments chose Lexham Island. Although undefended and with many landing sites for dropships, Lexham was 3,000 kilometres, 2 mountain ranges, and a difficult beach assault away from the Commonwealth's objective. One of the reasons Lexham Island was chosen became clear very quickly when General Steiner unloaded sea skimmer hydrofoils, monitor gunboats, and many hovercraft from his dropship. The first use of the 1st Provisional Lyran Water Navy, or the PLWN, was to support the Royal Guard's 2 beach assaults against Sanjusendo. The first assault, against the Yellow Peninsula, was made by infantry and tanks transported by hovercraft. It drew to it 2 Combine regiments of mechanized infantry and 1 tank regiment. The mechs of the Royal Guards were walking on the shallow seabed toward the Koloa Peninsula to the west. Their landing was virtually unopposed, and the mechs then headed up the coast and attacked Kuritan forces that had been trying to pinch off the Yellow landings. Because he feared that the Lexham drop was a mere diversion and that a 2nd LCAF regiment would invade Buckminster, General Tengwan missed an opportunity. He could have moved a lance of heavy mechs and a regiment of heavy tanks and artillery from the inland city of Pontiac to push the invaders back to the sea. Instead, they were held in reserve to defend against a now expected 2nd enemy drop. After defeating the light beach defences, the Royal Guard split into 2 sub-regiments, each with 2 battalions and a lightning company of mechs. The other regiments were also divided into 2 forces. The 2 groups then headed inland, one group heading through Cord Mountain Pass directly north, and the other through Fever Pass to the northwest. As the ground elements began their march, the ships and hovercraft of the PLWN headed southeast. Carrying 2 regiments of infantry, the flotilla began a series of raids on the coast. They destroyed military targets and seized food and fuel from coastal cities. Inland, Combine defenders tried to stop the Commonwealth advance by triggering landslides and rigging booby traps in the mountain passes, but the larger Commonwealth mechs and vehicles spoiled these attempts. Forced now to fight in the pass, 2 Kuritan battalions of light tanks and a regiment of mountain troops couldn't stand to the advancing Lyran forces. Once through the mountain passes, the Lyrans had nothing in their way until they reached the city of Pontiac. Waiting there were 3 tank regiments, an artillery battalion, 3 infantry regiments, and a company of heavy mechs from the 2nd Sword of Light. Rather than slow the entire force, General Steiner left a detachment of troops to subdue the city and sent the rest of the forces toward the northeast. 14 regiments of a company of heavy mechs encircled the city and attempted to enter. They quickly discovered that the Kuritan artillery was deadly accurate and would continue to inflict heavy casualties unless something was done. Repeated sorties then by the Guard's aerospace fighters would finally silence the Kuritan artillery unit and seal the fate of Pontiac. The 3rd Royal Guards, after their victory at Pontiac, would race across the plains of Sanjusendo, and by the end of October they were facing the Grierson mountain range, and the first major challenge from the 2nd Sword of Light. That regiment, along with several infantry and armour regiments, blocked the two main paths through the mountains, Sunders Pass and Grierson Pass specifically. General Steiner didn't have sufficient troops to force his way through the passes. Furthermore, the Lyran Intelligence Corps reported that the 6th Arcab Mech Regiment on Trolloc Prime might be preparing to reinforce the Sword of Light. If that were true, Commonwealth forces had to cross the Grierson Mountains before the Arcab arrived, or they never would. Through the courier system, General Roman Steiner sent a request to General Nondi Steiner for the use of the Elvinder, a unit of 6 Fortress-class dropships. His request was granted. In Scandinavian mythology, Elvinder was the Fortress of Death, the name proving very appropriate. The Third Royals would then attack the Combine forces holding the mountain passes. The attack, while fierce, was not intended to win ground, but to divert the enemy's attention. As far above them, 6 fortress dropships were entering Buckminster's atmosphere. The dropships were almost visible to the eye before General Tengwan was informed of the drop. He immediately ordered his troops to abandon their defensive positions and the mountain pass. Some of his troops didn't understand the urgency dictated by the approaching Commonwealth dropships, and they paid dearly for this tardiness. General Steiner ordered his troops to pursue the withdrawing Kuritan soldiers. As General Tengwan approached the end of the mountain pass, his worst fears were then realized. Through his binoculars, he could see 3 of the huge, squat fortress dropships across the mouth of the pass. He knew that the ship's incredible firepower would create broad killing lanes, through which only the swiftest and most heavily armoured mechs could escape. For the moment, the best he could do was hold back the charging Third Royals while he tried to find a safe path past the dropships. In the other pass, General Tengwan's executive officer was facing the same situation. At first, Dracona's troops would stop the Commonwealth forces and seemed to be in high spirits, but that changed when a long-tom artillery piece rose from the nose of each LCAF dropship and fired. Even though the first shots were poorly aimed, the explosions unearthed the 2 regiments of Green Buckminster militia. With enemy troops in front and dropships behind, they chose the latter in the vain hope that they could find a way past these metal behemoths. They broke and ran toward the dropships. Soon, more seasoned regiments under General Tengwan would begin to break. Tank crews abandoned their vehicles, soldiers put down their weapons and ran or hid, and seeing the growing panic, Commonwealth troops pressed the veteran Combine regiments that hadn't bolted. General Tengwan, faced with disaster, had no choice but to order a retreat, as the first panicking soldiers were just reaching the dropships. As expected, none escaped the fire of the 3 ships. Seeing no path past them, the general used the only tactic available, presenting the ships with so many targets that some would survive, because there would be no time to hit all of their targets. He ordered his swiftest units to race down the mountain pass toward the ships, while his mechs and tanks would push to reach the safe areas near the dropship hulls. Despite his soldiers' skilled use of available cover, the Commonwealth dropships raked the Kuritan forces with overwhelming fire for the next 2 hours. Of the 6 tank and infantry regiments and 2 battalions of mechs that began their journey through hell, only 1 regiment of armour, 1 of infantry, and a battalion of mechs, including General Tengwan's, survived to reach the flatlands leading to Buckminster. At the other mountain pass, DCMS forces suffered comparable losses. A week later then, the 6th Arcab Legion did drop on Buckminster. As the survivors of the battle for the passes retreated toward the capital, the Islamic warriors dropped to the north of the fighting. The appearance of the 6th Arcab Legion and its 12 accompanying infantry and tank regiments did cause considerable concern for the 3rd Royal Guards RCT. If united with the 2nd Sword of Light, the 2 might be able to break free of the Commonwealth's noose. General Nondi Steiner agreed to a request for reinforcement. Until help arrived then, Lieutenant General Roman Steiner kept the Arcab Legion at bay by detaching his Lightning Company, a hovercraft regiment, and an infantry regiment in hover armoured personnel carriers to harass the Arcabs. He also used the Elvinder, the fortress dropships landed in front of the advancing Combine forces, so fields of fire of the 6 ships would interlock. The first time they used this tactic, the dropships slaughtered a regiment of slow armour and a regiment of infantry. Later attacks were less effective because the enemy began dispersing their units as soon as their equipment sensed the dropships. The fortresses and the harassing attacks by the Lightning Company and the hover tanks would prove to provide enough time for the Lyran reinforcements to arrive. On the 2nd of December, the 20th Arcturan Guards, fresh from their victory on Camlan, dropped behind the Arcab Legion. The heavier mechs of the Arcturan forces erased any Arcab plans to attack the Third Royals. Instead, the Arcabs just hoped to link up with the Second Sword of Light. In response to the threat from the Arcturan Regiment, the Arcabs slowed their advance and closed ranks. This then allowed the heavier units of the Third Royals to catch up, and also presented a better target for the fortress dropships. When 3 dropships landed in the midst of their defensive positions, the warriors of the Arcab Legion realized that they were lost, and now had no hope of reaching the Second Sword of Light, the survivors retreating to the northeast. Meanwhile, the Second Sword of Light had retreated in fairly good order to Buckminster City. Close on their heels were the 1st Battalion of the Royal Guards and most of the Commonwealth Infantry. Once in the city, General Tengwan ordered the construction of fortifications and the evacuation of important documents and personnel. General Tengwan used the aerospace fighters attached to his mechs as escorts for the evacuation. General Steiner quickly took advantage of the Combine's lack of air cover, and Royal fighters made repeated sorties against Buckminster City, turning it into a cratered moonscape. On the 11th of December, the 1st Provisional Lyran Water Navy would arrive to complete the encirclement of Buckminster. It made the journey from the original drop zones of the Commonwealth forces along the southern and eastern coasts of San Jacinto, raiding cities and towns as they went. As of writing, the siege of Buckminster City would continue, though by the time Lyran forces were backpedaling elsewhere, the LCAF remained committed to the battle for Buckminster. Other reverses prevented General Nondi Steiner from committing enough forces to conquer the city.